Why do businesses conduct fraud? Why do people recycle? And why does your favorite app keep you scrolling for hours? In this video, it's all about incentives, the rewards and punishments that shape almost every decision you make, whether you know it or not. Welcome to another episode of Econ 101.13, the podcast where I make economics simple and where economics makes sense. Today, we're diving into incentives, the invisible forces that really influence our choices, and how they can go very, very wrong. If you think about it, economics is the field of study that involves decisions and choices, and many of your decisions and choices are influenced by both positive and negative incentives. They're the reason we do things. For example, Costco has a coupon for same day delivery where if you spend up to $100, you get $25 off. That's a big financial incentive that encourages consumer behavior to buy more in order to get more of a discount. Costco will then in turn get more sales. It's a win win for both parties. Incentives can benefit many parties, and they really come in three forms: economic incentives, social incentives, and moral incentives. Incentives are everywhere in school, in business, and in government. I'm sure when you were in elementary school, if everybody did well on a test, or if everybody was well behaved, the teacher would throw you a pizza party. That's a positive incentive. However, on the flip side, there are negative incentives. Maybe you were driving a little bit too fast, or you ran a red light, and you get a ticket. That's an example of a negative incentive. If you can understand how incentives work, you can understand economic behavior and decision making. So, I'm going to break down the three types of incentives and how they play out in everyday life. Economic incentives are the most obvious. Think about it like wages, discounts, coupons on the positive side, and on the negative side, fines, penalties, and surcharges. It's why salespeople are often paid not just on a small salary, but often based on commission. The more cars you sell, the more money you make. And fines and penalties are used to disincentivize bad practices and bad behavior. For example, if a business dumps a whole bunch of contaminants and pollution into the water, those impact not only the environment but society as well. Fines are used to reduce these types of behaviors. Governments have been using economic incentives in a variety of manners. For instance, tax credits for electric vehicles. They want people not to drive those big gas guzzlers, those trucks which pollute the environment and have significant negative externalities. That's why they've been using incentives to shift behavior towards sustainability. Even your favorite apps do it. Bonus points for frequent purchases, flash sales for purchases, limited time offers. These aren't random. They are deliberate, intentional promotional methods designed to drive behavior. But the world doesn't just revolve around money, because if that were the case, we wouldn't have social incentives. In some instances, social incentives are more powerful than economic incentives. Social incentives are all about how people perceive you. Ever join a club, posted online on social media, or avoided speaking up in class because of what others might think? That's social pressure, a powerful motivator. It's why when you're in grade 12 and graduating high school, students spend hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars on prom dresses, makeup for the big day. Even though it's quite a bit of money, the social incentives outweigh the economic incentives. It's why you donate to charity to boost your image, use reusable bags because everyone else is doing it, or you wear certain brands to signal status. Social incentives can drive us to conform, compete, or impress, even though there's no money involved. And moral incentives also drive behavior. These come from within. You do something because it feels right, not because you're rewarded. For example, returning a lost phone without expecting anything, helping a friend or a classmate even though it won't benefit yourself personally, or voting, even though your one vote probably won't make a difference. Moral incentives are tied to ethics, personal values, and sometimes cultural expectations. So, if these three categories of incentives, generally when you make a decision, there's going to be one type of incentive that's stronger than the others because oftentimes they're in conflict. So, we know that in economics, incentives drive decisions, but there are instances when incentives are not properly designed and they actually lead to negative outcomes. For example, you get perverse incentives, situations where people are rewarded for doing the wrong thing or where good intentions actually create worse outcomes. And there are many famous examples. Let's talk about cobras in India. To reduce deadly snake bites, British officials offered money for every dead cobra. At first, it worked. People brought in dead snakes in order to exchange them for cash. But then people thought, rather than just go out into the street and kill snakes, how about I just breed snakes and then just trade it for money? Can just run a farm. When the government realized what was going on and actually ended the program, the breeders released the snakes, and as a result, there were more snakes than ever. So the intention was to reduce the snake population, but it actually ended up making things worse. Another common example is hospital beds in the UK. Hospitals were funded based on how many beds were occupied. So if you're a hospital administrator, you're thinking, hmm, beds drive money. So I'm actually going to keep people longer than they should, and I'm going to get more funding for various projects or for operations. So to keep funding high, they actually slowed the discharges and actually kept patients longer than necessary. The result? Fewer open beds, longer wait times, and less efficient care. When incentives are not properly designed, they can lead to unintended, significantly negative outcomes. It's why Wells Fargo was actually caught conducting fraud. Wells Fargo is a giant bank in the US and they had aggressive sales targets, which put a lot of pressure on the employees and managers. The sales target was that employees had to open 8 accounts per customer. So, to meet unrealistic quotas, workers opened millions of fake accounts, often without the customer's knowledge or consent. In the short term, it looked great. Account numbers are going up, things are looking good, and growth is positive. People invest in Wells Fargo. But in the long term, it ended in disaster. Massive lawsuits, lost trust, and executives testifying before the Congress. So the incentive was to sell more and keep your job. But the problem was that it was not linked, safeguarded from these types of actions, and it led to systemic fraud across Wells Fargo. These stories all teach the same lesson. People respond to incentives they're given, even if those incentives reward the wrong behavior. That's why incentive design is a critical part of economics, public policy, and business strategy. For instance, trying to reduce drink consumption, cola, sugary drinks, candy, and even cigarettes is often accompanied by an excise tax, but more specifically in cigarettes. In Mexico, they implemented a tax on cola and soft drinks, and it actually reduced the amount of sugary drinks consumed per person because Mexico at the time continues to deal with a obesity epidemic driven by Coca-Cola consumption. We all know that cigarettes are not good for you. So, to encourage people to reduce their consumption, they tax cigarettes. It's called an excise tax. Smart incentive systems should reward the right behaviors, minimize opportunities to cheat or exploit the system, and include a mix of economic, social, and moral motivators. So, investing in things like research and development, small businesses, these are part of the fundamental institutions that governments implement to encourage entrepreneurship. That's a great economic incentive. Take a second to reflect. What motivates you to go to school? Would you work harder if you were paid more? Have you ever done something just to look good on social media? And what's something you would do just because it's the right thing and you may not be paid for it? Every one of those is tied to an incentive, whether you realize it or not. There's a lot of concepts that can be taken away from this episode because incentives are so fundamental to economics. It's related to scarcity and choice, market failures because incentives can create unintended results, behavioral economics and how real people make decisions, and overall government policy design, why incentive programs must be tested and designed carefully. This episode can be summed up in two words: incentives matter. The idea that people have goals that they are trying to achieve, and that therefore they will act differently depending on the circumstances. Because each decision has both costs and benefits. Perhaps the best way to illustrate incentives is to look at market forces. The free market is often theoretically the most efficient way of voluntary exchange because prices illustrate incentives. For instance, if you go to your favorite restaurant and you find that they've increased or actually doubled the price for your food, you're going to go somewhere else. That's an example of an economic incentive. That's a signal to the restaurant that perhaps they should lower their prices in order to capture more of that revenue and therefore more profit. Or if you can look at one of the reasons why that prices are going up, perhaps you might want to substitute for a cheaper alternative. Maybe you might use less butter in your cooking, or maybe you buy more margarine instead. The moral of the story is that price changes entail incentives for almost everyone in the economy. You might not think about it a lot, but you probably make a lot of decisions that involve responding to your ever changing personal incentives. These incentives may differ from everyone else, but oftentimes these incentives result in similar choices which accumulate across many individuals. And because people tend to respond predictably to incentives, businesses and government institutions notice, and they actually use incentives to encourage certain behaviors, as I've mentioned in the podcast episode. This makes it a little bit easier to create government policies and laws and regulations. And for incentives to be meaningful and effective, they have to be tied to the individual and have some sort of connection to the behavior being incentivized. It's all about finding the proper incentive and attaching it to the behavior that needs modification, or finding out how to encourage more of those behaviors. It's like playing SimCity. If you increase the price of taxes and you double your tax rate to 20-30%, people are going to move out. That's an example of an incentive. And that sums up today's video on incentives and why they matter. They're all around us: universities, patent laws, research grants. If you look at our institutions, they're designed to promote growth and discovery. When designed well, incentives, a proper understanding and incentives, can result in mutually beneficial outcomes for all. The surest way to get people to behave in desirable ways is to reward them for doing so or penalize unnecessary negative behaviors. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the podcast episode, I would appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and share with somebody who might be interested in learning about economics or incentives. Thank you again, and see you in the next podcast episode.